I'm delighted today to be joined by Zeeshan Feroz of Coinbase, Julian Sawyer of Gemini, and Miha Grčar of Bitstamp. I will stop sharing my screen now, and I would love it if my panelists would enable their audio and video. Thank you. So I guess I rattled through that. But one of the key findings from our report is that we note that top-tier exchanges are gaining market share at the expense of lower-tier exchanges. Now, one of the reasons we note this is because we find that the lower-tier exchanges are improving their processes and becoming top-tier exchanges, so that accounts for some of it. But also, we believe and we hope that this trend reflects increasing maturity in the marketplace. So I'd like to ask Zeeshan first, does this correspond with what you're seeing? And do you have any interesting anecdotes to share about increasing maturity?
I think it does reflect what we're seeing. And I think to some extent, the regulation, for example, is no longer optional. So you're looking at things like the Fifth Money Laundering Directive that are rolling out here in Europe. You've got other jurisdictions, even outside the EU, places like Singapore, Abu Dhabi, that have set up their own crypto regulation. So you're on the one hand, you're seeing regulators force exchanges down the path of getting regulated and maintaining a certain level of standard when it comes to both things like AML controls, KYC, as well as even crypto-specific licenses look at things like custody, hot wallets, cold wallet splits as well. And I think there's also, so on the one hand, you're not given a choice by the regulator in your jurisdiction. But I think on the other hand, you're also generally seeing, as more institutions start to step into this space, there's a preference for regulated exchanges and platforms. And I think that's also driving more volume towards that space. So I'd say probably those two, and it does certainly line up with what we're seeing here in our business.
Okay, thank you. And so I'd like to ask Miha for his views. We're headquartered in Luxembourg. How are you seeing this?
For sure, regulation is very important in the space. But at the same time, when you see more mature market participants and institutions enter the space, infrastructure and liquidity is just as important. Which I think is one of the key criteria that you used and applied in your report. And then lastly, I think now also tier one exchanges such as Bitstamp, Gemini, Coinbase are all expanding their listings. Traditionally, regulated exchanges and businesses were really hesitant to have very vast offerings, but now that this, I think, is a trend that's also changing. And all of this together results in higher market shares and higher volumes.
Thank you, Miha. Actually, Zeeshan, you made an interesting point about multiple jurisdictions releasing digital assets specific regulation. Is that a headache in itself? Are regulators looking at things completely differently? Could you, from a high-level perspective, Julian, if you could give some thoughts, what you're seeing and whether anything is jarring, or is it quite consistent?
I wish it was consistent, but unfortunately, oh, sorry, was that a question to me or
Julian? No, it's fine. Please, I'd like both of you. I'd like both of your views on this.
Oh, sorry, I thought I had my name. No, Julian, go first. I've had my turn first. You go ahead.
Thank you. I think. I think we all welcome regulation and the regulators being involved and engaged, and I think that's a given in this forum. I think where we are probably struggling, if you look at things like 5MLD in Europe, you have got local implementations, and that is going to cause challenges in terms of just the amount of effort that is required, but also a lack of consistency. So we would welcome the European Union and Europe as a whole to try and get as consistent as it can and implement it in the same time frame. So the difference between how the UK is implemented, Ireland hasn't as yet, and Germany has gone to another level, will just cause more complexity. But I think you've got to look at this from a consumer perspective. What we're trying to do and what the regulators majority are trying to do is to ensure that consumers have trust in this product set. And if they are seeing a difference between different markets, which are meant to be, particularly in Europe, a single market, then I think that is going to be harder to explain and to enable us to have that trust. Now, clearly, the regulators are also ensuring that there is systemic risk is taken out of this as well. But I think overall, what we would welcome is more consistency, which would enable us to go into the market with a clear message across the whole of Europe.
Thank you, Julian. I appreciate that. Just sticking with the topic of regulation and hoping that it doesn't bore our viewers, but you're top ranked, and as we've discussed and as the report shows, one of the reasons for that is that you take regulation seriously, usually erring on the side of caution. Now, there are exchanges that are younger than yours that have a different approach. They like to move fast, break things, and regulate later. But that creates a problem for your exchanges. And I'd be very interested to hear how you protect and grow your market share in the face of such competitors. And perhaps, Julian, we could start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, we're in this for the long game. And so therefore, you've got to look beyond the market share on a day-to-day basis and look at where this is going as a market. I think without a doubt, institutions as well as consumers will be looking for the regulated entities. And I think one of the things that your report is very clear on is who are the good guys and who are not so good. And I think that becomes a challenge and an opportunity, I think, for any of the AAs and A exchanges to say, how do we educate? And I'm using the word we here. I think that's really important. How do we all educate the market? And who is the market? It is consumers, it's institutions, and it's obviously the regulators. So I think that is really, really important. And I fundamentally believe that over time, more and more consumers will understand what this means. And we can see this very similar in terms of other areas in financial services, where you've got the European Deposit Scheme or the FSCS in the UK, where we all know if we deposit money, it is protected up to 100,000 euros. We know there's things like chargebacks on Visa and MasterCard, and we need to get to a place where there is that level of trust in the product set that we are going in. And I think the danger for us would be a knee-jerk reaction to say, well, let's forget about this, let's just chase the market share. So you've got to be very brave and courageous to say, let's look at this from the end game.
Thank you. And how does Coinbase view such competitors? And is there anything in addition to what Julian said that occupies you?
I think it's so there are two very extreme schools of thought, right? So on the one side, our approach and several exchanges here, our approach has been to work very closely with regulators, seek approval, and as you said, there are other approaches which are move fast, break things. And I think there's, for me personally, I think there's something to be learned from the opposite end of the spectrum as well, in terms of go-to-market and ability to scale in the ways that some of these exchanges have had done. I think where we're headed is there's a convergence into a regulatory landscape. You're seeing that with the larger exchanges setting up local hubs and getting the necessary licenses, which are the same as licenses as we as other businesses have. But I think that it is also like the latter approach, the more operate offshore and grow fast approach. I think in some ways it is also a forcing function for regulators to assess, the level of activity and potentially any risks that are presented to consumers by these models, and to try and bring them in the fold. So I think this is good business as well. Clearly, they're making money, and we have our own approach, and I think our approach for us feels like the right approach in terms of the long-term play here. I think there's also, just as a side comment, and I think a challenge that we've worked through is it's easier to grow from a regulated point of view into new markets than to come from an unregulated user base into a regulated market, because you contaminate that business with potentially risks, un-KYC'd customers, past activity, which may no longer comply. So I think there is a slow and steady angle perhaps to the approach here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Miha, do you have any points on that, or should we move on?
I think these are all excellent points. Maybe just one observation here. If we really look from, if we really take our industry as a whole, actually both spectrums bring something to the table. And we need players that are fast, break things, and innovate, because this is the lifeblood of our industry. All of our firms were moving fast and breaking things in the beginning, but then we went down the path of regulation and we had to slow down somewhat. This doesn't mean that innovation has to stop because maybe 3 older exchanges got licensing. This just means that maybe someone else can innovate while we maybe consolidate what we were breaking, and so they can build on top of that. For example, it's really hard to get banking. It was really hard to get banking in the early days. Now this is pretty much a solved problem, because on and off ramps such as our 3 exchanges provide that bridge. Now, what can be built on top of that is, I think, what we're seeing with the fast, innovative movers right now.
Thank you, Miha. Fascinating points, and a great little counter argument there as well, that actually a tip of the hat that you were breaking things back in the day as well. My next question is about market surveillance. It's one of our newly added categories. And actually there's a connection here between ourselves and Gemini, insofar as I believe, Julian, that from a market surveillance perspective, which is the monitoring and policing of the trading that occurs on your exchange, you've employed a third party to help you with that, called Nasdaq Smarts. Now, Nasdaq Smarts was actually founded by one of our board advisors, Professor Mark Aitken. So very interested first to hear about why you decided to go with a third party, and how you think about market surveillance.
I think, if you are a technology company, which, Gemini is, then you naturally go and say, well, we should be building everything. However, I think the really smart players are saying, actually, are there other people out there in the market who can get us to market quicker, can do things quicker, but also have they got something that we haven't got? And they have got the whole of market view. They have got the, I know it's very trendy to say AI or machine learning skills, but they've got the algorithms, they've got the technology that would take us time to deliver. And so for us, it was a matter of saying, well, actually, there's a partner out there, and there are various other partners in this space that provide us with that cross-industry, cross-market view that is really interesting and gets us to market quicker. And as with any technology company, you're always thinking about prioritization. You're always thinking about where do we put our engineers, etc. And this is a really good example of where it actually makes a lot of sense for us to use a third party to provide that information for us. And I think that becomes interesting when you just look at overall about how you use your technology investment and your spend, and finding the right partners to do that. I think these things will naturally ebb and flow in terms of, do you have capability internally at some point? Do you have different skill set? Do you see that as a competitive advantage, etc.? For us, we see having that whole of market view as something that is super important to us.
Yeah, and before I ask the other panelists the same question, we get asked a lot, how do you deal with the fake volume market manipulation element that is thankfully beginning to go, especially at the top rated exchanges. But we like to put that back on the exchanges, and this is why we've created that category. We think that there are third parties there that have vast experience of helping to weed these behaviors out in traditional markets. So we feel, and one of the reasons that we give exchanges a slightly higher score for using a third party is that, one, there's a shortcut there and the experiential gain that you can make, but also it reduces perhaps some of the conflicts of interest if you were to be doing that internally. But I'd love to hear Miha's thoughts on market surveillance.
So we took a very similar approach. We're using also Nasdaq's solution called Elysium, but which plugs into the Nasdaq's matching engine, which we implemented a few months ago. So meaning that Bitstamp is already using completely off-the-shelf third-party vendors and solutions that have been around for years in the traditional markets. Now, what this brings is obviously a level of sophistication, speed, and efficiency that we cannot put together ourselves, truth be told. Secondly, it also helps tremendously if you think about innovation with derivatives products, right? Because at the end of the day, every derivative product needs to have reliable underlying data from spot exchanges. And we're pretty proud at Bitstamp that all volume is 100% real, zero is fake. And we are used as one of the reference exchanges for every single index or benchmark or futures or options product in the market. And I think having integrity in data and having a more active or proactive role for market surveillance, I think, is a cornerstone of building stable, reliable, and fair markets, as well as transparent.
Thank you, Miha. Zeeshan, I appreciate most of the reasons you might already be covered, but do you have anything to add on that question? I think it's an important one.
No, I think the integrity of the market is probably one of the most important things for an exchange. We actually are an outlier in the sense that we're using an in-house built surveillance tool, and I think some of this decision really comes down to, it's quite personal to the business in terms of your tech stack and your speed to market and your goals. And I think for us, we, for various reasons, we've made the decision to build that in-house with the right skill set and the people and allocate it to it. It's a very crypto native product in terms of what we've built. So there's the other side to this, that we could really build it in a way that it integrated with our tech stack in the timelines that we wanted it to. So I think, there's merits to both approaches. I'd certainly put my hand up and say, building something in-house is definitely a slightly more resource intensive thing to do, but it served our purpose.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I just want to remind the audience that they can ask questions using the Q&A function. We've got another 20 minutes or so of questions that I've prepared for the panelists, but please start filling them in, and I'm very happy to take them at about in about 15 minutes or so. So my fourth question is regarding listing criteria. And it's interesting to note the spread across Gemini and Coinbase and Bitstamp as to the amount of coins that are carried on your exchange and the strategy and views of how to, the decisions that go into adding another coin. Now to look at this, we partnered, as I mentioned in my introduction, with Flipside Crypto, who provide us with a qualitative assessment of coins and tokens. And the aim of that is to grade their investability. So I suppose exchanges have a constant balance between wanting to offer a diversification to their clients and offering coins and tokens that are as investable as possible given the the new ecosystem and the new paradigm. So what is your process for deciding to list new coins, and what do you think about quality control in this area, Miha?
First and foremost, an exchange needs to be agnostic when it comes to assets. So we're not here to pick winners, but our tradition was always to be very much on the on the conservative side. And this is coming from the early days when pretty much all altcoins were a knockoff of Bitcoin and really didn't bring anything new to the table. And this was our view for a really long time. Then if you think about all the ICO craze that happened in 2017, that was obviously also not the best idea to go crazy with the listings, simply because there was an abundance of really bad products that really didn't deliver anything, if not outright scams. But right now, I think the space has matured to a degree where you can more easily identify really interesting protocols and solutions and products that are being built by really innovative teams. And we as an exchange, being regulated, obviously had to put policies in place that got approved in Europe, in Luxembourg, in New York, and that takes time. But now, as you noticed, maybe in June, we've listed a few new pairs, added new quote currencies, and this is something that we'll just continue on doing for the rest of the year into the future.
Thank you, Miha. I know that you're covering your coverage is similar to Julian, so perhaps forgive me, Julian, and I'll ask this question to Zeeshan, who is the outlier again here. Could you speak to your coin inclusion process, and also be aware that some projects and coins tend to move quite favorably ahead of perhaps joining your exchange?
Yeah, so I think, to Miha's point, our role isn't to be kingmaker when it comes to projects, but we have a responsibility to our customers to do our due diligence and ensure that what we're offering them is offered in a safe, secure manner, and it's to some extent meets a certain bar, a standard for the asset. I think actually the previous questions quite nicely distill down to the assets that we support, in the sense that right at the top you have regulation, and you have places like the US, for example, where there's relatively more ambiguity in terms of what may or may not be a security, and therefore we have to be quite thoughtful and cautious about what we list and how we list it. And then there's also we touched briefly on Miha touched briefly on banking rails. So you've got payments partners, you've got a lot of other partners that provide you with the on and off ramps, who also have varying risk appetites. And actually, one of the things from a regulation point of view is interesting is assets are treated differently from one place to another. So being a global exchange, you're also playing this sort of regulatory arbitrage of what asset you can offer where. We've been looking at things like stablecoins being classified as e-money in some jurisdictions and falling into traditional fiat regulation buckets. So I think there's no secret sauce here. There's no magic on how we pick one asset versus the other. I think our intention is to support as many assets as we can. But the idea there is to try and do our due diligence to make sure we take our regulatory partners, our banking partners, all of our partners along in that process to make sure we're all on board when an asset is listed. We actually fairly recently, about I think 2 weeks ago, announced an open framework for integrating blockchains called Rosetta. And that's actually designed to encourage asset issuers to build libraries that can move towards some standardization of how an exchange might add an asset. So it's all open source, it's out there. But the idea is ultimately to create, again, some standardization on how we list assets.
Thank you, I really appreciate that. Julian, was there anything you'd like to add to that question?
I think it's been covered, thank you.
So one thing I'll note as CryptoCompare is that we know that the monetization models on the exchange side is thankfully different. It used to be during the heady days of the 2017 boom. It used to be the game that exchanges would charge listing fees for their projects, but fortunately this is now a much smaller proportion of their revenues. So the next question I want to ask is actually something that's close to my recent past, and that is custody. And again, you're faced as exchanges with a key decision to make, whether you spin off your own custodial solution or whether you use a third party. And so again, the panel is split. I note that Coinbase and Gemini have built their own custodial solutions. They're different entities, but they're still branded by the same company. And Bitstamp uses a market-leading third party. Can you walk me through this? Perhaps Julian, walk me through your decision-making here. Yeah,
up to a point, because I relatively recently joined Gemini, so a lot of this was done before. But I think the important things in my mind is, if you look at the value chain and what we should be giving to our customers, then custodian is part of the exchange proposition. So that's the first thing. The second point, I think, is let's look back to what we talked about earlier, which is technology and delivery. And I think organizations need to look and see, well, can they deliver something which has got a unique USP, which is going to provide their customers with service with a capability, and have they got the capacity to do that? And our view in Gemini was, yes, we think we should be doing that, we should be building that. But I think it goes back to that value chain and ensuring that if you understand what are the key components of offering a service like a custodian, what do you need to do and deliver? So I'm not sure it is as fundamental that one way is right or one way is wrong. I think it is much more around what else have you got involved. And I think really the key point is that value chain. It is we, again, going back to my first comment, we as an industry need to educate consumers about what this means. What should they be, how they should be storing their digital currencies and their digital assets, and what does protection mean? I think this is very well understood in the institutional side, and I think what we need to do is to educate people around their protection, etc. And as a AA and an A exchange, we all have the role to do that. So I don't think it's as fundamental as there's one way and everybody, and that's the right way and there's a wrong way. I think it's much more around the execution part of this.
Yeah, and Miha, you use a third party, so you actually forgive some of the opportunities to make more fees, as Julian, paraphrasing Julian. Could you walk us through your decision to do that?
Well, maybe you pass the opportunity to make some fees, but then again, you also pass the opportunity to take some heavy risks. As an exchange, our philosophy was that we are an exchange and our focus is on trading. And that as an exchange, we need to be agnostic to where the assets are being stored, especially with more institutional adoption, where an institution may be not as comfortable with, let's say, a custodian that we are using, or if we would be operating our own, but they want to be trading out of their own custodian. An exchange, our view is that an exchange should enable that. And it's literally a question of being connected to as many custodians in the long run as possible, as opposed to maybe also have a little bit of a conflict of interest by operating your own. But it's a philosophy, or it's a view, it's a business decision, which can also change and evolve over time. When we started, there was not even a notion of a custodian. Everything was a Bitcoin client on a different laptop. So Bitstamp was actually the first exchange to segregate into cold and a hot wallet, simply because we were really uncomfortable with having so much Bitcoin hot, even if Bitcoin was trading less than at $10 or less. So there's a natural evolution here to which we're responding and adapting our approach to as well.
Thank you, Miha. Zeeshan, do you have anything to add on that point?
I think Miha actually touched on a great point, which was, going back, wind the clock back a few years, and it almost wasn't a choice in terms of how you custody. There wasn't a market of custodians as such. And for us, customer funds is, one of the most sacred things. Well, it is the most sacred thing we hold, and we want to be in control of our destiny when it comes to securing that. So as a result, we've done our best to set it up as a separate trust company that operates with its own board. It is independent for all intents and purposes, but at the same time, it ensures that the technology, the infrastructure, the risk decisions are made in line with the general risk appetite and the security posture of the business, which is what was really important for us.
Yeah, and I was fascinated to see that that creation of that trust, and I believe Gemini has done the same. It makes a lot of sense. You can both silo risk, and you can also apply products like insurance against it fairly cleanly, which is a great development in this space. And we actually go into a little bit of detail as to which exchanges are using insurance, and we think that's pretty important. So I guess I'm going to ask a slightly curvier question now. So it's a final question that I've prepared for you. Across the three of you, none of your exchanges carry any futures and derivative products. Now, in our exchange reviews, monthly exchange reviews, we are noting explosive sequential monthly growth in derivatives, options, and futures contracts. It's got to be tempting, right? You've got to be looking at those volumes and say, yeah, I think that's something maybe we should be playing for. But up until now, you haven't. And so I'm going to ask you all this question, and perhaps start with Miha. Why are you not doing derivatives?
We're simply here for the long run, which doesn't mean that we're not going to do derivatives, but if or when we do it, we're going to do it the right way, which is like we always did things, right? With regulatory approvals, compliance solutions, and client protection, consumer protection. And right now we have so much things on our plate that we're focusing on the spot exchange still, but that doesn't mean that derivatives doesn't look terribly interesting to us as well.
Understood, and maybe our viewers can read between the lines there. Julian, you're up.
I think it's very similar, and this is about getting the regulators, the overall market aligned to these products, the risks, etc. So we focus on what we are allowed to do, and we try and work with the institutions and regulators and government on this matter. So yeah, it's exciting, but I think the key thing, as Miha said, is let's not just chase the next shiny new car that's there. Let's work out the right way of doing it in a controlled way that helps customers and protects their money and their investments.
Fascinating. Zeeshan? So
perhaps I'll try and give maybe a little bit more controversial answer. I feel like everything's been very safe. Is that a good thing that the derivatives market is growing as fast as it is? It's kind of the question I'd ask, because if you look at the derivatives market today, most of the volume is offshore, unregulated. It is, interestingly, mostly retail volume in unregulated markets. So if you look at the breakdown and the stats on it, there's products like 100x leverage available, which to retail customers, which I think in some ways is, well, I think it could be dangerous, for an individual who doesn't understand the scale of this. And we've actually heard in recent weeks stories from popular platforms like Robinhood, for example, where derivatives have been exposed to people who weren't entirely fully aware of how the repercussions of that could be, or what the exposure downside was. So I think, we're absolutely looking at the market, where we're absolutely seeing that there's a lot of interest. But when we start to look at it from our lens, from what we owe our customers and what we should be exposing to our customers, I think there's certainly an element of what is the right way of doing it. And if the right way means, and this is the philosophy we've lived with as a business, if the right way means that we're not offering derivatives today, then so be it. I think there is more of an institutional opportunity on the derivatives side as well. I mean, in most countries, including the UK, they're looking at banning retail sales of crypto derivatives anyways. But the institutional opportunity is a emerging opportunity with players like CME, backed in the US, and I think that is certainly a very interesting play. So I think we're looking at the growth, but we think that there is actually a more healthier growth in this space yet to come, and that's what we want to structure ourselves for.
Yeah, no, fascinating. I mean, it's been a while since I took my regulation exam, probably 20 odd years now, but I was always convinced that regardless of underlying, derivatives are regulated products. So scratching my head a little bit as to how some of them are appearing, at least on these shores, as investable products. Anyway, I'd like to, I'm about to go to some of our audience questions, but one of our board members wanted to pose this question to you, Herbie Skeet actually. He said that with Goldman Sachs saying that Bitcoin is not an investable asset class for its clients, and noting that your clients are very much institutional, or at least a decent component of your volumes are institutional. How do you reconcile a statement like that from Goldman Sachs with what you're seeing? What do you think? And I'll start this one with Zeeshan.
I think that was an interesting report. I think it was published maybe 6-8 weeks ago, maybe a little longer. I think the space in general, and I actually, if you look at the last 4 or 5 years, there's been different reports that have gone from this is interesting to this is uninvestable to this is a scam type of model. I frankly don't pay a lot of attention to that. Like we didn't see any, I don't think anyone saw our volumes drop after that report. So I think it is valuable input generally that a Goldman Sachs is allocating resources to do analysis and to look at this space. I certainly agree that there's more maturity needed in this space, which goes back to your first question and why we need some of the grading on this with exchanges. I think there is more investment needed in terms of core infrastructure and the maturity of assets, like Bitcoin itself, has a lot of growing up to do, and whether it's a storage of value or a payments instrument, and I have my views on that. So I think commentary on that level is useful, but it isn't the final word. And the way I think about it is you're going to get these types of milestones, positive or negative. There's still milestones in your journey into this asset class maturing.
I'd say that was a fairly conservative answer, Zeeshan, so thank you for that. Any more controversial views, perhaps? Julian, Miha?
Yeah, I'd just add that, does Goldman Sachs make any money from promoting Bitcoin? And the answer is no, so why would they promote something that they make no money on? But you can discuss that, can't you?
Yeah, I guess so. I'll leave that one for other people to think about.
Well, there's also the fact that we got this far without them. So why should the price be affected? And secondly, Goldman Sachs is an absolutely huge institution. So if one division or one research department thinks like that, I'd be curious to see or hear what the guys on the trading desks have to say about it, right?
and what their crypto portfolio is. I mean, the authors of the report were, I would say, fairly heavyweight on the. I think it was Hatzius, Goldman Sachs chief economist, although he didn't comment all the way down the line. But I thought it was still interesting, the people that put their names to it. But I think the agency question is probably the correct one there. Okay, so it's a nice segue actually. Ben Whitby of Credo is asking the question, and he says, sorry, it's the age-old question, but what one thing, we've touched on a few of them, but what one thing is needed to bring institutional clients to the space and have them look at trading tokenized instruments? Who would like to take that?
I'll have a quick go. So I'm going to, even though Ben has said only one thing, I think it's actually three things. First of all, they need to have the comfort that the regulator is engaged with this asset class. Without that, they won't do anything. And we are seeing more and more that happening across the globe. So that's one thing. Secondly, the institutions are going to want to have customers who are also interested or open to this asset class. And again, we are seeing that happening across a whole range of markets. And then the other telling point, and I think we've got some fantastic examples over the last few months in particular, where institutions have taken this concept of digital assets from the innovation lab, from the tech lab, and put it into people who've got a P&L. And if you've got people in institutions with a P&L trying to work out how they're going to make money, and they're seeing some opportunities, that will really push the agenda within the organization. It's absolutely clear that all of the big institutions are looking, have got projects. It's about getting it into the P&L team, getting the risk committees, etc., to be engaged. So I think it's three things: it's consumers, it's regulators, and it's getting to the right people in the organization. And I think we can all probably cite examples where those three forces are coming together right now, which is tremendously exciting for us all, I think.
Yeah, and just to, sorry, Miha, just to piggyback on Julian's comment, I think another thing that will drive adoption is something like a government digital currency. I think that as traders have to put digital currencies on their watch screens alongside USD, alongside Euro, then I guess you're kind of there, aren't you? You have them legitimized or on the screen. As you say, the P&L starts computing live, and they're a hop, skip, and a jump away from some of the native assets. Miha, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, sure. Just like Julian, I have listed three things as well, and I narrowed it down to regulation, infrastructure, and client demand, which no bank or no institution is going to do anything if no one's willing to pay something for it. But maybe to tie in on what you said about central bank issued stable coins, I often wonder whether this is really going to be a game changer or not, because if it's just a new protocol, so just a new way to put the same thing on a different protocol and then apply the same policies to it, which we're all seeing now in Europe and the US and across the globe, I actually wonder if that's going to be an added value or not. Actually, it could endanger privacy. It could introduce a lot of control oversight. So, key values of democracies and capitalism are also at stake if, let's say, a digital dollar gets introduced by the Fed without any changes to the way how, let's say, the money supply is being done and so on. So I don't think just like adding a new ticker on there and put it on the blockchain is going to solve anything. It may just create a new headache that no one knows how to control. And by the way, this is a bit of my personal rant, so don't attribute it to Bitstamp, please.
I won't. Zeeshan, anything you'd like to add there, or should we move on with another audience question?
Well, I digress because I'm going to digress because I have a very different opinion to this, to Miha. So
perfect.
You haven't had any conflict on the panel yet, so let's create some. So I understand and appreciate your perspective, Miha. I actually think we're talking about the same thing, but I think central bank backed digital currencies are a really good thing. And allow me to explain. I think it's only a digital representation of the dollar or the pound or the euro, right? So it fundamentally is the same thing with the same underlying monetary policy, etc., and shortcomings. But I think what this does is it introduces a digital currency, a form of digital money to the general population, to everybody. And I think that's the kind of exposure that very few government institutions or businesses have to the influence of pushing or driving through that sort of change. So I think on the journey to perhaps utopia, which is a decentralized world, I think central bank backed digital currencies, what they tend to do is they move us closer by bringing your existing infrastructure into the digital currency realm. Now, what I think that will do is it'll spur investment, it'll spur a lot of infrastructure around digital currencies in general. It will help the average individual make the leap from holding on to a £10 note to I have £10 as a digital currency in my wallet. And then I think the leap from that to the choice of a digital decentralized currency is much smaller. And I think the decentralized ecosystem generally benefits from that too as well, because I think a lot of investment in the infrastructure to support central bank-backed digital currencies should be transferable or should be more adaptable to decentralized currencies than perhaps existing fiat or the SWIFT network is today. So I think it carries with it a lot of the shortcomings, but it also helps program folks to accept a digital form of currency, which is in the right direction for a decentralized currency.
No argue with that. What do you say about privacy?
So privacy is a thing. It's interesting because when you look at the general population, I'm talking, let's pick 100 million people, there's a lot of value people would put on privacy, but people click terms and conditions, sign on to websites, use Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat all day long. And you could argue that that is the biggest invasion of privacy that you could imagine. They are effectively the product. And my point here is there's a lot of people out there, and I'm not saying it's the right thing, but what I'm saying is there's a lot of people out there who don't care about privacy in the sense that a lot, or not even aware about privacy in the same sense that perhaps we are. So I think a central bank-backed digital currency does empower the government to, it gives them a new tool to monitor movement in a stable coin and on the blockchain. But then so if I turn that question around, does that not bring the question of privacy to the forefront and then push people towards the decentralized world, which is now more accessible because you have a lot of central bank-backed digital currencies?
This debate is spiraling out of control, James. So please put us on the right path.
I will jump in here and curtail it. To be frank, I could discuss this until the cows come home. So anyway, I will ask a slightly easier question, although probably you have to leverage on what you know from the regulators. But Konstantin of CEX is asking, we mentioned before the different regulators and the different approaches taken by regulators, even inside of Europe. Do you think we'll start seeing things that like passporting, whereby if you're regulated in one country that's deemed to be an adequate assessment, that it will be valid elsewhere? Julian?
Yeah, we're under EU regs. If I am an e-money or organisation or a bank, then I can passport to any other jurisdiction within the European Union. That is inherently managed or oversight by your base or home regulator. I think what is interesting is if you go from one country where there is no 5MLD to a country which has, what are the rules for doing the passporting? Now, my understanding of passporting is that the inbound regulator has an FYI, which is you've been passported from your home country, and they can ask some questions, but it is not the done thing to say no. I think what is really interesting is now you've got fundamentally different ways of 5MLD, and I'm just picking that as one example that's been implemented, which means you will have a problem. And the problem is that you will get some exchanges, none of the ones here, I'm sure, who will go to the lowest common denominator, the easier regime, to get your e-money or your PI, your payment in institution, and then passporting. So I think there's going to be a real challenge in terms of not just what the regs are in the major markets, but also the way that they have been implemented, and therefore to uphold the single market. How does that work? And I think that is, I think the problem for all of us is we're going to have to spend a lot of time and a lot of money making sure that we are compliant in each of our markets, while the consequences, and I think it's probably the unintended consequences of the regs, are bedded down. So I think it's going to be a bit of turmoil for a little while over this, and I think the impact on consumers are, do they actually understand their protection? And I think the answer is no. And then secondly, do they understand the difference of an exchange that is regulated in the UK pre-Brexit, or Luxembourg, or Lithuania, or Malta? And there are some issues, there are challenges, there's ways of which are the jurisdictions that have the higher ranking. And I don't know in the future whether your report is going to start looking at that and saying, exchanges that are in these countries are classed at a higher level because the base infrastructure is there and supported, not just what the exchange is doing, but what the regulator is doing.
Yeah, we do take that into account already to some degree. Obviously, we have to try and keep it a level playing field for the exchanges that are domiciled in places where there isn't a like for like. I've got time for one more, and it's from Jose Zamora. He's asking, and it's an interesting question. You say, what do you take in consideration to make your services available in different countries, especially Latin America and maybe Guatemala as well? Maybe Jose is from Guatemala, but the use cases are perhaps for a non-sovereign currency like Bitcoin are probably high there. So what goes into your decision making there, and will you be rolling out into countries, frankly, that might really need them? I'll start with Coinbase, if that's all right.
Sure. That's the whole international growth piece for us has been a talking point, and when you're looking at taking a regulated approach is actually quite an interesting question, because a lot of countries in South America don't have regulation today. But there are actually a lot of core infrastructure challenges in terms of on and off ramping into crypto, and moving funds in and out of the country at a fiat level again presents its challenges. So I think when we think about the way we think about this is where can we legally provide our services, and where can we build services which are usable? And by usable, I mean that where you can buy, you can withdraw funds, you can trade. I completely agree. I think there are countries where there is a fairly natural need for cryptocurrencies as an alternative to their central bank currency. But unfortunately, a lot of those countries, the existing financial infrastructure isn't conducive to a international entity like ourselves setting up and accessing local rails. So I think, but that is a problem that I think we'd like to solve, particularly here at Coinbase, and it is top of mind.
Miha, 20 seconds on that.
I think this is a problem we're all trying to solve. And first and foremost, sure, you always want to be on the right side of the rules, but then ultimately it's a practical question and a practical problem. And even if we would like to sometime offer our services to a particular market, maybe the barrier to entry, or maybe the cost for the clients to actually fund their accounts, is just too high or prohibitive for them. So it works both ways, and where the client as well as the exchanges have real problems of getting together, if I put it that way, right?
Thank you, and thank you so much, everybody. And so we had Julian Sawyer, who is Managing Director of Gemini for Europe. We had Zeeshan Feroz, who's the UK CEO for Coinbase, and we had Miha Grčar, who is the Global Head of Business Development for Bitstamp. Thank you all so much for your time, for your insights. I've really enjoyed it today.